You know that moment when something just feels meant to be? Like the universe aligned everything perfectly just for you. That's how I felt when I finally found my wedding dress after 5 months of searching. Where are you watching from today? Comment down below. I'd always dreamed of getting married in something that felt like me. Not what the bridal magazines told me I should wear, not what was trending on social media, something that spoke to my heart. And let me tell you, finding that perfect dress was harder than finding my fiancé James, and he was worth the 10-year wait. Every weekend for months, my mom and I visited bridal shops across 3 counties. I tried on princess ball gowns, sleek modern sheaths, bohemian lace numbers, you name it. Some were beautiful, but none of them felt right. My mom kept saying, "When you know, you'll know." And honestly, I was starting to think that magical moment was just a myth. Then came that rainy Saturday in April. We almost canceled our appointment at this little boutique tucked away in a converted Victorian house downtown. It wasn't fancy, and their collection was small, but something told me to keep the appointment. The owner, Eliza, was this elegant older woman who'd been designing dresses for 40 years. The moment I walked in, she looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "I have something special in the back room. Not on display. Not for everyone. Something special." When she returned holding this vintage-inspired gown with delicate beadwork and the softest ivory silk, I actually gasped. It had these little pearl buttons down the back, just like my grandmother's wedding dress from the photos I'd treasured my whole life. Grandma Rose had been my person, you know. She passed away when I was 16, but she was the one who taught me about love, the real kind that stands the test of time. The dress wasn't even on a mannequin, just hanging there, catching the light, waiting for someone to see its beauty. As I slipped it on, I could almost feel my grandmother's presence. The way it fit, like it had been made for me. The vintage lace overlay, the subtle shimmer of the beadwork, the way it moved when I walked. For the first time, I didn't see a bride in a beautiful dress. I saw myself, on the most important day of my life. I stepped out to show my mom, and she just started crying. Not the polite little wedding tears, but full-on sobbing. "That's it," she whispered. "That's your dress." Then came the reality check, the price tag. This one-of-a-kind dress was nearly double my budget. My heart sank. I stood there not wanting to take it off, calculating how many extra shifts I'd need to pick up at the hospital. As a nurse, I make decent money, but between student loans and saving for a house with James, this felt impossible. My mom saw my face and knew exactly what I was thinking. "Kate," she said, "some things are worth sacrificing for. This isn't just a dress, it's the beginning of your new life." So I did it. I put down the deposit that day. For the next 6 months, I worked every extra shift I could get. No vacations, no new clothes, packed lunches instead of the hospital cafeteria. James noticed how tired I was getting and kept asking why I was working so much. I wanted to surprise him with how perfect the dress would be, so I just told him I was saving for our honeymoon. The truth was, this dress had become more than fabric and thread to me. It represented everything I wanted our marriage to be. Timeless, unique, a perfect balance of honoring the past while creating something new. Every time I went for a fitting, I felt that connection to Grandma Rose, like she was guiding me toward this new chapter. James and I had been together since sophomore year of college. We met in the library during finals week when we both reached for the same economics textbook. Instead of arguing over who needed it more, we studied together until closing time. By the end of the week, I knew he was different from anyone I'd ever met. Patient, kind, brilliant, but never showing off. The way he listened made me feel like the most interesting person in the world. We dated through college, survived a year of long distance when he got into grad school across the country, and finally settled back in our hometown when he landed his dream job at the university and I started at the local hospital. After 10 years together, his proposal wasn't a surprise, but it was perfect. A quiet moment on the front porch of the little cottage we'd been renovating together. Now, with our wedding just 2 months away, everything was falling into place. The venue, a historic garden with a gazebo where my parents had gotten married. The small guest list of just our closest friends and family. The menu featuring recipes from both our grandmothers. And my dress, the absolute heart of it all. What I didn't realize was that this dress would become the center of more than just my wedding day. It would become the thing that nearly tore our families apart, tested my relationship with James, and ultimately taught me what I was truly made of. I remember the day I brought my dress home from its final fitting. I hung it in the spare room closet, hidden under a garment bag, and just sat there looking at it, imagining James's face when he saw me walking down the aisle. I took a picture of just a small detail of the beadwork, nothing that would give away the design, and sent it to him with the message. Just a tiny glimpse. Can't wait to be your wife. He replied almost immediately, "Whatever it is, I know you'll be the most beautiful bride ever." Counting down the days. I had no idea that within weeks, that dress, my dress, would be at the center of a family war I never saw coming, and that my future mother-in-law was about to show me exactly who she was, in a way I could never have imagined. If I had known then what was coming, would I still have chosen that dress? Absolutely. But I might have invested in a better security system for it, because some people, as I was about to learn, have no problem taking what isn't theirs, especially when they're family. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags from our very first meeting. But you know how it is when you're in love. You want everyone else to be as happy as you are, so you make excuses for behavior that would normally set off alarm bells. I met James's family about 3 years into our relationship. They lived across the country, and with our busy college schedules and tight budgets, visits hadn't been possible. We'd done the obligatory video calls on holidays, but those brief, pixelated interactions hardly count as getting to know someone. James always spoke about his mom, Diane, with this mixture of respect and resignation. "She means well," he'd say after hanging up from one of her calls where she'd interrogated him about his grades, his career plans, his diet. I found it sweet how he defended her, never letting on that her weekly unsolicited advice emails bothered him. But he rarely mentioned his sister Amber, and when he did, it was usually about something expensive their parents had bought her. Then came spring break senior year, when we finally scraped together enough for plane tickets to visit them in Connecticut. I was nervous but excited. These people were going to be my family someday. Their house was immaculate. Not lived-in immaculate, but museum immaculate. The kind where you're afraid to set your water glass down without a coaster appearing underneath it before it touches the surface. Diane greeted us at the door in a perfectly tailored pantsuit, not a hair out of place, pearls gleaming at her throat. She air-kissed James and gave me a once-over that felt like a security scanner. "Catherine," she said, though I'd introduced myself as Kate in every call. "How colorful your outfit is. You must stand out at the hospital." I glanced down at my floral maxi dress, perfectly appropriate for spring travel, and managed a smile. "It's actually Kate, and I'm still in nursing school for another few months." Yes," she replied, already turning away. "James, your father's in his study. He has some investment options he wants to discuss with you." And just like that, within 5 minutes of arrival, James was whisked away, leaving me alone with Diane. She led me to a sitting room where every cushion was plumped to perfection, and offered me water, not in a glass, but in a crystal tumbler with a linen napkin. "So," she began, sitting across from me, ankles crossed perfectly, "James tells me you're from... where was it again?" "Ohio, just outside Cleveland." "Right. Quaint." The way she said it made Cleveland sound like a primitive settlement without running water. And nursing is certainly a respectable career path. Before I could respond, the front door slammed and in walked Amber, or should I say, glided in. She was stunning in that polished, expensive way that makes you immediately aware of your split ends and chipped nail polish. She looked like James, same dark hair and green eyes, but where his features were warm and kind, hers were sharp and assessing. "Mom, you won't believe what Jessica's mother got her for graduation. A Mercedes convertible and a trip to—" She stopped mid-sentence when she saw me. "Oh, you must be Kate." "Yes, hi. I've heard so much about you," I lied, standing to greet her. She tilted her head. "Funny, James barely mentions you." "Amber," Diane cut in, but there was no real reprimand in her tone. If anything, she seemed amused. "Be nice. Catherine is our guest." "It's Kate, actually," I said again, feeling my smile strain. Kate is such a common name, don't you think? Catherine has so much more elegance, Diane said. "Amber, darling, tell Kate about your graduation plans." For the next 20 minutes, I heard every detail of Amber's graduation from law school. The exclusive venue, the designer dress, the catering menu. How she'd already secured a position at her father's firm. How 3 men from good families were pursuing her. "Of course, I'm not ready to settle down," she said with a pointed look at me. "I want to establish my career first. Not everyone is in such a rush to get a ring." "James and I aren't in a rush," I clarified. "We've been together for 3 years." 3 years? Diane's eyebrows rose. "And still no proposal? Interesting." The way she said interesting made it clear she meant concerning. As if James's failure to propose after 3 years was a serious character flaw, either his or mine. Just then, James returned, looking slightly frustrated but brightening when he saw me. He gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before sitting next to me, his hand finding mine. "Dad's pushing tech stocks again," he said with an eye roll, before turning to his sister. "Hey, Amber, how's the job search?" "Already done," she said smugly. "Dad's bringing me on as a junior partner." James's eyebrows shot up. "Junior partner? Right out of law school? That's impressive," she supplied. "Unprecedented," he finished. Diane jumped in. "Your sister has always known exactly what she wants and how to get it." She patted Amber's hand. If only everyone had such clarity and drive. The rest of that visit followed the same pattern. Every meal was a showcase for Amber's accomplishments. Every conversation circled back to Diane's suggestions for improving our lives. A better apartment. A more prestigious hospital for me. A different haircut. A more ambitious 5-year plan. By the second day, James was constantly apologizing when we were alone. "They're just like this," he'd say. "It doesn't mean anything." But it did mean something. It meant that in this family, appearances mattered more than authenticity. It meant that Amber was the sun, and everyone else orbited around her. It meant that nothing I did would ever quite measure up to Diane's standards. On our last night, Diane cornered me in the kitchen as I was getting water. "You seem like a sweet girl, Kate," she said, actually using my preferred name for once. "But I worry you're not quite ambitious enough for James. He has such potential." I looked her straight in the eye. "James and I want the same things in life, Mrs. Chen. And we want them together. That's what matters to us." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see," she said softly. "Plans change. People grow. Sometimes in different directions." When we left the next morning, I felt like I'd survived some kind of test and failed spectacularly. But James held my hand on the plane and whispered, "I'm sorry they're so intense, but you're the one I choose. Every day I choose you." And that was enough. Or at least, I thought it was. I had no idea that 6 years later, when James finally did propose, his mother and sister would see it not as a celebration of our love, but as a challenge to their control. And my perfect wedding dress? In their eyes, that was just another thing Amber deserved more than I did. When James proposed on our 10th anniversary, I was ready for the inevitable clash with his family. What I wasn't prepared for was how quickly Diane would swoop in and try to take over every single aspect of our wedding. The ring was barely on my finger when my phone lit up with a text from her. "Congratulations! I've started a shared document with venue options. Most have a 2-year waiting list, so we need to decide quickly." I showed James, who sighed and said, "Just ignore it. We'll plan our own wedding." But ignoring Diane Chen was like ignoring a Category 5 hurricane heading straight for your house. 3 days after our engagement, she called to inform us that she'd be hosting an engagement party at their country club in Connecticut. "But we wanted something small with our local friends," I protested. "You can do that too," she said dismissively. "But James's father has colleagues who need to be included, and Amber's connections will be valuable for your future. I've already put down the deposit." James squeezed my hand as I muted the call to take a deep breath. "We can just say no," he whispered. But I could see the conflict in his eyes. No matter how much he distanced himself from his family's expectations, he still craved their approval on some level. And truthfully, I wanted them to accept me, to see that I made their son happy. "Fine," I said when I unmuted the call. "But we get final approval on the guest list." Diane laughed as if I'd told a charming joke. "Of course, dear. I'll send you what I have so far." The list she sent had 187 names on it. We knew perhaps 15 of them. In the weeks leading up to the party, Diane called daily with urgent questions. What were my thoughts on champagne versus Prosecco? Did I prefer salmon or chicken? Was I planning to wear cream or white? Each question came with her strongly implied correct answer. Meanwhile, I was deep in the throes of dress hunting. After finding my perfect gown, I'd scheduled fittings and started the alteration process. I'd shown photos to my mom and my best friend Rachel, swearing them to secrecy. The dress made me feel like royalty, and keeping it a surprise from everyone else, especially James, was part of the magic. The engagement party was scheduled for a Saturday in June. James and I flew in the day before, staying at a hotel rather than with his parents, a small boundary I'd insisted on. When we arrived at the country club, I was stunned. The place looked like something out of a bridal magazine, with white roses and peonies everywhere, crystal chandeliers, and a string quartet playing softly. "Your mother went all out," I whispered to James. "This isn't for us," he reminded me gently. "This is her showing off to her friends." Diane greeted us wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than our monthly rent. "Catherine, darling," she said, air-kissing me again. "That dress is interesting. Bold choice for an engagement party." I glanced down at my simple blue cocktail dress. There was absolutely nothing bold about it. "I think she looks beautiful," James said firmly, his arm around my waist. Diane smiled tightly. "Of course she does. Now, I need to introduce you to Judge Maxwell. He could be very useful for your career, James." And so it began. 3 hours of being paraded around like show ponies, with Diane narrating our life story to strangers. Only her version was heavily edited. According to her, James was being headhunted by prestigious universities. He was happy at his current position. I was considering medical school after nursing, news to me. And we were looking at properties in Connecticut. Absolutely not. Halfway through the evening, I escaped to a quiet corner with Rachel, who'd flown in for moral support. I pulled out my phone to show her the latest photos from my dress fitting. "Oh my God," she gasped, zooming in on the details. "Kate, it's even more gorgeous than the last fitting. That beadwork is incredible." "I know," I gushed, swiping to show her the back. "And look at these pearl buttons. They remind me so much of my grandmother's dress." Rachel zoomed in again. "The craftsmanship is amazing, and it fits you perfectly." "3 more fittings to go," I said. "But it already feels like—" "Like what?" came Amber's voice from behind us. I nearly dropped my phone, quickly locking the screen. "Amber, you startled me." She smiled, her eyes calculating. "Sorry, couldn't help overhearing. Were those wedding dress photos?" "No," I lied instinctively. "Just some ideas for centerpieces." "Funny, I could have sworn I saw a dress," she pressed, moving closer. "Don't worry, I won't tell James. Sisters should share secrets, right?" The way she said sisters made my skin crawl. There was nothing sisterly in her tone. "Kate and I were just catching up," Rachel intervened. "College roommate stuff. You know how it is." Amber didn't move. "Mom's been helping me plan my wedding for years. I have a whole portfolio ready for when Mr. Right comes along. She has excellent taste. You should really consult her on your dress." "I've actually already found my dress," I said, unable to keep the pride from my voice. Something flashed in her eyes. Interest? Envy? "Really? From where?" Before I could answer, Diane appeared beside her daughter. "There you are, Amber. The Richardsons are asking about you." She glanced at my phone. "What are you girls looking at so intensely?" "Nothing," I said quickly, slipping my phone into my purse. "Kate was just showing us her wedding dress," Amber announced. Diane's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose. "You've chosen already? Without any input from family? How decisive of you." "It's bad luck for too many people to see it before the wedding," Rachel jumped in. "Bless her." "Superstition is for the insecure," Diane said with a dismissive wave. "I'd love to see it. Perhaps I could offer some suggestions." "It's perfect as is," I said firmly. "But thank you." Diane's smile tightened further. "Well, perfection is subjective, isn't it? Amber's future dress will be custom Vera Wang. We've already discussed the design." "Without a fiancé?" Rachel asked innocently. If looks could kill, Rachel would have disintegrated on the spot. Later that night, I noticed Amber and Diane huddled in a corner, glancing in my direction periodically. When I approached, they quickly separated. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Wonderful," Diane said. "We were just discussing how unique your taste is. It's refreshing to see someone so comfortable with unconventional choices." On the flight home, I checked my photo gallery and noticed something odd. Several photos of my dress had been opened recently, though I hadn't looked at them since showing Rachel. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered setting my purse down during dinner, leaving it unattended for at least 20 minutes. "James," I said slowly, "do you think your mom or Amber would go through my phone if they had the chance?" He looked startled. "What?" "Number they're boundary pushers, not privacy invaders." I wanted to believe him, but that night I got a text from an unknown number. Such a beautiful dress. Vintage inspired, right? Those pearl buttons are to die for. I showed James, my hands shaking. "It's probably just Rachel texting from a new number," he reasoned. But deep down, we both knew it wasn't. And 2 days later, when I received an email notification that someone had attempted to access my cloud photos from an unrecognized device in Connecticut, I knew this was just the beginning of something much worse than I had imagined. After the engagement party, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe I'd accidentally opened those photos myself. Maybe the text was just a wrong number. Maybe the login attempt was some random bot. But that uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake it. Still, I was determined not to let Diane and Amber's strange behavior ruin this special time. Our wedding was 4 months away, and I had my second-to-last dress fitting coming up. Despite everything, I decided to extend an olive branch and invite Diane. James thought it was a great idea. It might help her feel more included, he suggested. Maybe that's why she's being so intense. I had my doubts, but I wanted to try. So I called her. Diane? It's Kate. I was wondering if you'd like to come to my dress fitting next week. I know we got off on the wrong foot with the engagement party, but I'd really like your input on the final details. The line went quiet for a moment. Well, she finally said, sounding genuinely surprised. That's very thoughtful of you, Catherine. I'd be delighted. She actually sounded sincere, and I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this could be a turning point. Eliza's boutique was as charming as ever when Diane and I arrived for the fitting. I'd decided not to tell her about the mystery text or the login attempt. No need to start this peace mission with accusations. Diane looked around the small shop with barely concealed disdain. This is quaint. I didn't realize people still shopped at boutiques like this. Eliza's been designing dresses for decades, I explained. She's a local legend. Everything is one of a kind. Was all Diane said, running her finger along a rack of sample dresses as if checking for dust. Eliza emerged from the back, her silver hair in its usual elegant twist. She greeted me warmly before turning to Diane with a professional smile. You must be the mother of the groom, she said. How wonderful to meet you. Likewise, Diane replied coolly. I understand you've been making dresses for quite some time. Eliza's eyes twinkled. Since before you were born, dear. Now, Kate, let's get you into your dress. We've finished the beadwork on the bodice. As I changed behind the curtain, I could hear Diane asking Eliza questions, polite at first, about her background and training, but gradually becoming more specific about techniques and materials. When I emerged in my dress, Diane's reaction was not what I expected. Instead of the dismissive look I'd braced for, her eyes widened with what looked like genuine appreciation. It's stunning, she admitted, circling me slowly. The craftsmanship is exceptional. Thank you, I said, surprised and pleased. Maybe this was working after all. Turn around, dear, Eliza instructed, making some final adjustments to the train. The back detailing is coming along beautifully. As I turned, I caught Diane's reflection in the mirror. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was studying the dress with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, her eyes narrowed in concentration. Those pearl buttons, she said, reaching out to touch one. They're exquisite. Vintage? Yes, Eliza confirmed. Genuine freshwater pearls from the 1920s. Nearly impossible to find these days. Diane nodded, deep in thought. And the lace overlay, Belgian. French, actually, Eliza corrected, from a small atelier outside Paris. Throughout the fitting, Diane took photos. Lots of photos. She claimed they were for a surprise wedding album she was putting together, but something about her focus on the dress's details rather than me wearing it felt off. Would you mind if I recorded a quick video? She asked. The way the dress moves is so lovely. Before I could answer, she was already filming, directing me to turn slowly, bend slightly, walk a few steps. It felt less like a proud mother-in-law moment and more like she was documenting evidence. Eliza seemed to notice too. As she helped me change back into my clothes, she whispered, Your mother-in-law has quite an eye for detail. Yes, I agreed uneasily. She does. As we were leaving, Diane suddenly turned back. Oh, I almost forgot to ask. Who's the designer? I have a friend whose daughter is getting married next year. This style would be perfect for her. Eliza smiled politely. I'm the designer. As Kate mentioned, all my dresses are one of a kind. Yes, but surely you have a pattern. Templates? Something that could be referenced? Diane pressed. My designs are not for reproduction, Eliza said firmly. Each bride gets something unique to her. Diane's smile tightened. Everyone has a price. The drive back to my apartment was uncomfortable. Diane asked questions about the dress, where it would be stored until the wedding, when the final fitting was scheduled, whether there were any other details being added. You seem very interested in my dress, I said carefully. It's a mother's job to be interested in wedding details, she replied smoothly. Especially when the bride's mother is uninvolved. My mother wasn't uninvolved at all. She just lived in another state. But I let the dig slide. 3 days later, I got the call that changed everything. I was on my lunch break at the hospital when my phone rang with Eliza's number. Kate, it's Eliza. I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Her serious tone immediately put me on alert. Of course. What's wrong? Did you authorize your mother-in-law to inquire about commissioning a replica of your dress? My blood ran cold. What? Number, absolutely not. Eliza sighed heavily. I thought as much. She came by the shop yesterday with another young woman, her daughter, I believe. They asked if I could create a sister dress based on your design. A sister dress? I repeated, my voice rising. Yes. When I refused, explaining my policy on original designs, she became quite insistent. She said, and I quote, "My daughter fell in love with the design, and surely there's room for 2 similar dresses in the family." I felt sick. What did you tell her? I told her I would need written permission from you, which seemed to surprise her. Then I asked her to leave. Eliza paused. Kate, she offered me a considerable sum of money. When I still refused, she asked for the name of my fabric supplier. I closed my eyes, trying to process this. Did you give it to her? Of course not. But I wanted to warn you. This woman is determined. After thanking Eliza, I called James immediately, anger and betrayal washing over me. Your mother tried to get a copy of my wedding dress made for Amber, I blurted when he answered. What? That can't be right. There must be some misunderstanding, he said. There's no misunderstanding, James. She went to my dressmaker and tried to bribe her into making a replica. For your sister, who doesn't even have a fiancé. The line was silent for a moment. Let me talk to her. I'm sure there's an explanation. He called me back an hour later, his voice subdued. She says she just thought the style was beautiful and wanted to see if something similar could be made for Amber's eventual wedding. She didn't mean to upset you? Do you believe that? I demanded. I don't know, Kate. It sounds plausible. Mom's always planning ahead, and she did say your dress was stunning. James, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, your mother tried to steal my wedding dress design. For your sister. After going through my phone to get pictures of it. After trying to hack my cloud storage. This isn't normal mother-in-law behavior. You're overreacting, he said gently. She's enthusiastic, that's all. And we don't know for sure she went through your phone. I wanted to scream, but I took a deep breath instead. I need you to set some boundaries with your family, James. This is our wedding. My dress. It's not up for grabs. Of course, he agreed quickly. I'll talk to her again. But as I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. And I was right. The week after the dress fitting incident, I tried to focus on work. James had promised to talk to his mother, and I wanted to believe that would be the end of it. But there was this nagging feeling in my gut that wouldn't go away. Like when you know you've forgotten something important, but can't quite remember what. My final dress fitting was scheduled for Saturday, exactly 3 weeks before the wedding. I'd arranged to meet my mom there. She'd flown in specifically for this moment, and I couldn't wait to share it with her. This was supposed to be one of those perfect mother-daughter memories we'd treasure forever. That Friday night, James and I were having a quiet dinner at home when my phone rang. It was Eliza, calling after hours, which was unusual. "Kate?" Her voice was tight with tension. "I need you to come to the shop. Now." "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately on alert. "Is everything okay with the dress?" There was a pause. "The dress is... Please just come. And perhaps bring your fiancé." James looked up from his plate, concern crossing his face as he registered my expression. "What's going on?" "I don't know," I said, already grabbing my keys and purse. "But something's wrong with my dress." The 15-minute drive to Eliza's boutique felt like hours. Every terrible possibility raced through my mind. The dress was damaged, lost, destroyed in a fire. But nothing prepared me for what Eliza told us when we arrived. The shop was dark except for a light in the back office. Eliza met us at the door, her normally composed face lined with distress. "I'm so sorry, Kate," she said, leading us inside. "I've already called the police, but they said there's not much they can do." "Called the police?" James echoed. "What happened?" Eliza took a deep breath. "Your dress is gone. Someone came in this afternoon claiming to be here to pick it up for you." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. "What? Who would—" But even as the question left my lips, I knew the answer. "The security camera caught them," Eliza said, turning to her computer. "I didn't recognize them at the time, but looking at the footage now..." She pulled up a video on her monitor. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to see 2 women entering the shop. One older, one younger, both well-dressed and confident. Diane and Amber. The video had no sound, but we could see them talking to Eliza's assistant, a college student who only worked Fridays. They showed something to her, a phone maybe, and then the assistant went to the back room. Minutes later, she returned with a garment bag. Diane signed something, and then they left with my dress. My assistant said they showed her a text, supposedly from you, authorizing them to pick up the dress for a surprise final adjustment before your mother arrived tomorrow, Eliza explained. She didn't know any better. She's devastated. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the screen, at the image of Diane walking out with my dream dress, the dress I'd worked extra shifts for months to afford, the dress that connected me to my grandmother, the dress that was supposed to make me feel like the most beautiful bride in the world. James was shaking his head in disbelief. "There has to be a mistake. My mother wouldn't—" "It's her, James." I cut him off, pointing at the screen. "That's your mother and sister walking out with my wedding dress, 3 weeks before our wedding." His face paled. "I don't understand. Why would they do this?" "Because Amber wants it," I said, the realization crystallizing. "She's wanted it since she first heard about it. Remember the text? The login attempt? The visit to Eliza to try to get a copy made? And now they've just... taken it." "I called the police," Eliza repeated. "But they said since your mother-in-law is family, it's a civil matter, not theft. They suggested you talk to her directly." James was already dialing his mother's number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried his sister with the same result. Then his father, who actually answered. "Dad, is Mom home? This is important." James listened for a moment, his expression darkening. They went where? When will they be back? Another pause. No, it can't wait. It's about Kate's wedding dress. He hung up, looking grim. They're at some charity gala in the city. They won't be home until late. So, what do we do? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. My final fitting is tomorrow. My mom flew in for it. The wedding is in 3 weeks, and my dress is just gone. James ran a hand through his hair, looking more distressed than I'd ever seen him. We drive to Connecticut. Tonight, we get the dress back, and I make it very clear to my mother that this kind of behavior is completely unacceptable. For the first time since we'd arrived at the boutique, I felt a glimmer of hope. James was taking this seriously. He was angry, not at me for overreacting, but at his mother and sister for their actions. We thanked Eliza, promised to update her, and headed home to pack overnight bags for an impromptu road trip to Connecticut. The 4-hour drive gave us plenty of time to talk. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you before," James said after we'd been driving in silence for about an hour. "About my mom going through your phone, about her trying to copy your dress. I just couldn't imagine her doing something like that." "And now?" I asked quietly. "Now I don't know what to think. The woman on that security footage. That's not the mother I thought I knew." We arrived at his parents' house just after midnight. The place was dark, except for a light in what I knew was his father's study. We rang the doorbell, and after a moment, James's father answered, looking confused and slightly annoyed. "James? Kate? What on earth are you doing here at this hour?" "Where's Mom?" James demanded, brushing past him into the foyer. "She and Amber aren't back yet. What's this all about?" James explained the situation in clipped sentences. The missing dress, the security footage, the unanswered calls. His father looked genuinely shocked. "There must be some mistake," he insisted. "Diane wouldn't steal a wedding dress. That's absurd." "We have it on camera, Dad," James said firmly. "I'd like to wait up for them." We sat in the formal living room, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. James's father kept checking his watch and muttering about misunderstandings. I sat rigid, afraid that if I relaxed even slightly, I'd start crying and never stop. Finally, just after 1 a.m., we heard the front door open. Laughter drifted in from the foyer. Diane and Amber, sounding carefree and jubilant. "Robert? Are you still up?" Diane called. "You won't believe who we ran into at the—" She stopped short when she entered the living room and saw us. For just a flash of a second, something like guilt crossed her face before her features settled into polite surprise. "James! Kate! What a wonderful surprise! What brings you here so late?" I stood up, hands shaking with anger. "You know exactly why we're here, Diane. Where is my wedding dress?" Diane's expression shifted from surprise to annoyance, as if we were the ones who had done something wrong by showing up unannounced. "What are you talking about?" she asked, placing her clutch on the side table with deliberate calm. Amber appeared behind her, still in her evening gown. When she saw us, she froze momentarily before forcing a smile. "Wow, family reunion! What's the occasion?" "My wedding dress," I repeated, struggling to keep my voice steady. "The one you two stole from Eliza's boutique this afternoon." "Stole?" Diane's hand flew to her pearl necklace in a gesture of shock that seemed rehearsed. "That's a serious accusation, Catherine." "We have you on security camera," James said, his voice tight with anger. "Taking Kate's dress from the shop under false pretenses. What were you thinking, Mom?" Robert looked between his wife and son, bewilderment clear on his face. "Diane? Is this true?" "Of course not," she scoffed. "We simply picked up the dress for safekeeping. Catherine's mother is in town, isn't she? We thought it would be a lovely surprise if the dress was properly pressed and ready. These small boutiques don't always maintain the standards one would expect. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, I almost questioned myself for a moment. Almost. That's not what you told the shop assistant, I countered. You said I had authorized you to pick it up for a surprise final adjustment. A miscommunication, clearly, Diane said with a dismissive wave. The girl must have misunderstood. James stepped forward. Where is the dress now, Mom? A flicker of something, calculation, maybe, crossed Diane's face. In the guest room closet, of course. Perfectly safe. I want to see it, I demanded. Now! It's after 1 a.m, Amber interjected. Couldn't this wait until… Now, James repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Diane's smile tightened. Fine. Follow me. We trailed her up the grand staircase, tension crackling in the air. She led us to the guest room, not to the closet, but to Amber's room across the hall. My heart sank. She hadn't even tried to hide it well. Why are we in Amber's room? James asked, suspicion clear in his voice. I asked her to hang it in her closet, Diane explained smoothly. The guest room is being painted next week, and I was worried about fumes affecting the fabric. Amber stepped forward to open her closet, a walk-in larger than our entire bedroom at home. She flipped on the light, revealing rows of designer clothes and shoes. And there, at the far end, was a white garment bag. See? Safe and sound, Diane said triumphantly. I moved forward to take it, but something didn't feel right. The bag looked deflated somehow, not full enough to contain my dress with its layers of tulle and silk. Open it, I said to Amber. She hesitated, exchanging a quick glance with her mother. Open it, James repeated. With reluctance, Amber unzipped the bag, revealing my dress, or what was left of it. The elegant ball gown I'd fallen in love with had been systematically altered. The full skirt had been slimmed down, the neckline lowered, and worst of all, someone had begun removing the vintage pearl buttons that had reminded me of my grandmother. What did you do? I whispered, horror washing over me. For the first time, Amber looked genuinely uncomfortable. I just made a few adjustments. The silhouette wasn't flattering, and the neckline was so matronly. You destroyed my wedding dress, I said, my voice rising. My wedding is in 3 weeks. Diane stepped between us. Don't be so dramatic, Catherine. Amber has improved it. The original design was lovely, but a bit dated. These changes make it more sophisticated. Sophisticated? I echoed in disbelief. You've ruined it. You had no right to touch my dress, let alone alter it. We're family, Diane said, as if that explained everything. And in this family, we share. Share? James looked incredulous. Mom, this isn't a sweater Kate borrowed. This is her wedding dress. That she paid for. That was made specifically for her. Diane's composure finally cracked. A dress that would look far better on Amber. Do you know how many compliments she got at the gala tonight just wearing the prototype we had made? Everyone agreed she looked stunning. The room went silent. Prototype? I looked more closely at the dress in the garment bag. This wasn't just altered. Some of the beadwork was different, the lace pattern slightly off. This isn't even my dress, I realized aloud. This is a copy. Where is my actual dress? Amber and Diane exchanged another glance, and Robert, who had been quietly observing until now, stepped forward. Diane, he said gravely, where is Kate's original dress? Diane's chin lifted defiantly. In safekeeping for Amber's wedding, she fell in love with the design, and frankly, it suits her far better than Catherine. I don't see why there's such a fuss. We've provided a perfectly good replacement. Replacement, James repeated, his face flushing with anger. You stole Kate's dress for Amber, who isn't even engaged, and then tried to pawn off a knockoff on my fiancé 3 weeks before our wedding. Amber is as good as engaged, Diane snapped. Bradley is proposing next month. We have it all planned, and she deserves a dress as special as she is. I felt dizzy, like the floor was tilting beneath me. Where is my dress? I asked again, fighting to keep my voice from shaking. My actual dress. The one I paid for. Amber sighed dramatically and moved to the back of her closet, pushing aside rows of clothes to reveal another garment bag, this one properly filled out. She unzipped it halfway, revealing the familiar beadwork and fabric of my original gown. Happy now? She said petulantly. It's just a dress. I don't see why you're being so selfish. Selfish? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This is my wedding dress, that I spent months searching for, that I worked extra shifts to afford, that connects me to my grandmother. And you think I'm being selfish for wanting it back? Diane stepped forward, her voice taking on a wheedling tone. Catherine, dear, be reasonable. Amber has always wanted a dress exactly like this. When she saw it, she just fell in love with it. Surely you can understand that. As family, we should support each other's dreams. My dream, I said through clenched teeth, is to wear my dress at my wedding in 3 weeks. Not to have it stolen and hidden away for your daughter's hypothetical future wedding. Not hypothetical, Diane corrected. Imminent. And Amber deserves the best. She always has. James understands that, don't you, James? Everyone turned to look at James, whose face had gone from angry red to a dangerous pale. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but filled with a cold fury I'd never heard before. What I understand, Mom, is that you and Amber have crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. You stole from my future wife. You lied to all of us. You damaged a dress that has deep sentimental value to Kate. Diane's eyes widened. James, surely you can see— No, he cut her off. I don't see your side at all. What I see is that you care more about Amber's hypothetical wedding than you do about my actual one, or about me, or especially about Kate. Robert finally spoke up. Diane, this has gone too far. Give them the dress back, the original dress, now. But, Amber began. No buts, Robert said firmly. This stops now. I stepped forward and took the garment bag with my original dress, clutching it to my chest like a shield. As I unzipped it fully to check for damage, my heart sank. While not as extensively altered as the copy, someone had already started modifying it, taking in the waist, removing some of the beadwork that made it special. It's ruined, I said, tears finally spilling over. You've ruined my dress. James put his arm around me, pulling me close. We'll fix it, he promised. Whatever it takes. As we prepared to leave with my damaged dress, Diane made one last attempt. I still don't understand why you're being so difficult about this, Catherine. Family shares. Family makes sacrifices, especially for Amber. I turned to her, suddenly feeling more sad than angry. That's the difference between us, Diane. To me, family supports each other's happiness. It doesn't steal it. The drive back from Connecticut was mostly silent. We'd checked into a hotel for what remained of the night, neither of us capable of driving 4 hours on no sleep and high emotions. In the morning, James called his office to take a personal day, and I texted my mom to postpone our final fitting. I couldn't bear to tell her why over text. My dress lay across the back seat in its garment bag. Like a wounded friend, we were rushing to the hospital. Every so often, I'd turn to look at it, hoping that somehow the damage wasn't as bad as I'd thought. but I knew better. "We'll fix it," James kept saying, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "We'll make it perfect again." I wanted to believe him, but deep down I knew some things, once broken, can never be fully restored. Eliza was waiting for us when we arrived at her boutique that afternoon. Her eyes widened in horror as we unzipped the garment bag to reveal what Diane and Amber had done. "Oh, Kate," she breathed, her fingers hovering over the altered neckline, the removed beadwork, the reshaped waist. I don't even have words." "Can it be fixed?" James asked, his voice tight with worry. "We'll pay whatever it costs. Hire whoever you need." Eliza's expression was grave as she carefully examined each alteration. "Some of it, yes. The neckline can be restored, though it won't be exactly the same. The waist can be let out again." She paused at the back of the dress. "But the pearl buttons, they're irreplaceable, and they've removed nearly half of them." My grandmother's buttons, the very thing that had made this dress feel meant for me. I turned away, unable to look anymore. "The wedding is in 3 weeks, James reminded her. "Is that enough time?" Eliza sighed. "Normally, I'd say no, but for Kate..." She squared her shoulders. "I'll work night and day. I'll call in favors. We'll do everything humanly possible." As we left the boutique, the weight of what had happened finally hit me full force. I broke down in the car, sobbing until my chest ached. James held me, murmuring reassurances, but I could feel his own anger and confusion simmering beneath the surface. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I should have listened to you sooner. I should have seen what they were capable of." Back at our apartment, I had to face telling my mom what had happened. She'd flown in specifically for the final fitting, and now I had to explain why her daughter's wedding dress was essentially in surgery. "Mom," I said when she answered my call, my voice still raw from crying. "Something's happened with my dress." I told her everything, from the engagement party snooping to the security footage to finding the dress in Amber's closet. By the end, she was furious. "Who does this woman think she is?" she demanded. "Stealing your wedding dress for her daughter? I'm coming over right now." An hour later, my mom was at our kitchen table, helping us make lists of everything that needed to be done to either fix my dress or, the option none of us wanted to consider, find a new one with almost no time left. "Eliza's the best," I insisted. "If anyone can restore it, she can." "But what if she can't?" my mom asked gently. "Honey, we need a backup plan." James's phone had been buzzing nonstop all day. Diane, Amber, his father. He'd ignored most of the calls, but finally answered one from his dad. "I'm not interested in excuses," he said after a terse hello. His face darkened as he listened. "No, this isn't something that can be smoothed over with an apology. Because they didn't just make a mistake, Dad. They deliberately stole and damaged Kate's wedding dress. No, I don't think I'm overreacting." He paced as he listened, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Kate is my priority now. My future wife. If Mom and Amber can't respect that, then they've made their choice." "Yes, I'm serious. I don't know if they should come to the wedding at all at this point." My heart skipped a beat. As angry as I was, I hadn't considered that James might actually cut his mother and sister out of our wedding. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part worried about what this would mean for his relationship with his family, and ultimately, for us. When he hung up, he looked exhausted. "Dad's livid with them. He's making Mom pay for all the repairs to your dress, and he's..." James hesitated. He suggested that maybe Mom and Amber shouldn't attend the wedding. "Is that what you want?" I asked carefully. He sat down heavily at the table. I don't know what I want anymore. Except for you to have the wedding day you deserve. That night, after my mom had gone back to her hotel and James had finally fallen into an uneasy sleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Our wedding was supposed to be one of the happiest days of our lives. Now it felt tainted, overshadowed by family drama and betrayal. The next morning brought a text from Diane. Catherine, I hope you'll accept my sincerest apologies for the misunderstanding about your dress. As a peace offering, I'd like to pay for a new dress, one that would be suitable for both you and Amber. Perhaps something more universally flattering? We could shop together this weekend. I showed it to James, who read it twice before handing the phone back, his expression dark. She still doesn't get it. Later that day, Eliza called with an update. The good news is, I can restore about 70% of the original design. The bad news is, those pearl buttons are truly one of a kind. I've been calling every supplier I know, but... It's okay, I said, trying to mean it. Do what you can. As word spread among our friends about what had happened, people rallied around us. Rachel organized a search for vintage pearl buttons across every antique store and online marketplace she could find. My colleagues at the hospital adjusted schedules so I could take extra time off for emergency dress fittings. James's friends took him out for drinks, letting him vent his confusion and anger about his family's betrayal. But even with all this support, cracks were beginning to show in our relationship. Late one night, after another frustrating call with his father, James turned to me. What if we just postponed the wedding, gave ourselves more time to get your dress properly fixed, to figure out how to handle my family? The question hit me like a physical blow. You want to postpone our wedding because of what your mother and sister did? No, I want to postpone it so you can have the perfect day you deserve, he countered. With the perfect dress. The perfect dress is gone, James. Your mother and sister made sure of that. But that doesn't mean we need to put our lives on hold. He sighed, rubbing his temples. I just hate seeing you so upset. And I hate that my family caused this. They're still your family, I said quietly. And after we're married, they'll be mine too. We need to figure out how to deal with that reality. Do we? He asked, his voice strained. Because right now, I'm not sure I want them in our lives at all. Those words hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. Was I coming between James and his family? Was that what Diane had intended all along? With 2 weeks left until our wedding, everything that had once seemed certain was now in question. My dress, our guest list, and most worryingly, the strength of our relationship in the face of family pressure. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, Eliza called with an idea that would either save our wedding or make everything infinitely worse. Eliza's call came at 10 p.m., just as James and I were getting ready for bed. Kate, I think I have a solution, she said, her voice brimming with the kind of excitement that made me sit up straight. But it's a bit unorthodox. Can you come to the shop first thing tomorrow and bring James? I barely slept that night, my mind racing with possibilities. What could Eliza have come up with? A miracle seamstress who could restore the dress perfectly? A vintage collection of identical pearl buttons? Or was it something else entirely? The next morning, James and I arrived at the boutique before it officially opened. Eliza ushered us into her back workroom, where 3 dress forms stood draped in different fabrics. My original dress, still damaged but cleaner and partially mended, hung on one. The second held what looked like the beginnings of a simpler gown in ivory satin. The third was empty. I've been thinking about this problem all wrong, Eliza began, her eyes gleaming with purpose. We've been trying to fix what's broken, when what we really need to do is create something new, while preserving your victory. Victory? I echoed, confused. Against your future mother-in-law and sister-in-law, she clarified. They want your dress. They went to criminal lengths to get it. The question isn't just how to fix your dress, it's how to make sure they don't win. James and I exchanged glances. This was a side of the elegant, professional Eliza we hadn't seen before. Strategic. Almost mischievous. I'm listening, I said cautiously. Eliza pointed to the second dress form. This is what I call the decoy dress. Simple, elegant, something any bride might choose for a garden wedding. Not particularly unique or special. A decoy? James asked. Precisely. From everything you've told me, Diane and Amber aren't going to give up. They've invested too much, emotionally and literally, in getting this dress for Amber. If they think they've won, if they believe you've settled for something else, they'll let their guard down. Understanding began to dawn on me. You want us to make them think I'm wearing a different dress. Not just think it, know it. I suggest you tell them directly that you've given up on restoring your original dress, that it was too damaged, too heartbreaking to keep fighting for, that you've chosen this simple backup instead. She gestured to the plain gown. But what about my actual dress? I asked, glancing at the damaged original. Eliza's smile widened as she moved to a large cabinet in the corner of the room. That's where this comes in. She unlocked it and carefully removed a garment bag, then unzipped it to reveal a dress that made my breath catch. It wasn't my original dress, but it wasn't entirely different either. The silhouette was the same, but the beadwork had been rearranged into a new pattern. The neckline had been subtly reshaped. And there, down the back, was a line of vintage pearl buttons, not identical to my grandmother's, but similar in their aged luster and delicate craftsmanship. How did you... I began, reaching out to touch the fabric. I have connections, Eliza said simply. A network of designers, suppliers, seamstresses who owed me favors. We've been working round the clock since you brought back the damaged dress. This is what I call the phoenix dress, risen from the ashes of the original. It's beautiful, I whispered, running my fingers over the beadwork. But it's so different from my original dress. Won't Diane and Amber recognize that immediately? That's where the strategic deception comes in, Eliza explained. You'll let them think you've given up on your dream dress entirely. Meanwhile, we'll keep working on this one in secret. No social media posts, no final fitting photos sent to anyone but your most trusted circle. James, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward to examine the new dress more closely. And what about my mother and sister? You think they'll just accept that Kate's chosen this simpler dress? They will if you sell it right, Eliza said, turning to me. You need to appear defeated, Kate. Gracious in your surrender. Let them think they've won. The plan was starting to take shape in my mind. And then on the wedding day. You arrive in the phoenix dress, Eliza finished. By then, it will be too late for them to do anything about it. James frowned slightly. This feels a bit manipulative. Doesn't it just escalate the situation? I understood his hesitation. This wasn't just about a dress anymore. It was about drawing a line, about showing Diane and Amber that they couldn't take what was mine without consequences. It's not about revenge, I said carefully. It's about protecting something important to me. About not letting them steal this part of our wedding day. Eliza nodded approvingly. Exactly. And there's another dimension to consider. From what you've told me, Diane and Amber believe they've damaged your dress beyond repair. They think you have no choice but to accept their victory. Imagine their faces when they realize you've not only recovered, but created something even more beautiful. I like it, I decided, a sense of lightness spreading through me for the first time in days. But I still wish I had my grandmother's buttons. Eliza's eyes twinkled. I may have a solution for that too. My colleague in vintage restoration thinks she can salvage at least some of the original buttons from your grandmother's dress. We won't know for sure until next week, but there's hope. As Eliza outlined the details of the plan, I felt something shift inside me. For days, I'd been a victim. Heartbroken, powerless, reactive. Now I had agency again. A strategy. A way forward that didn't involve simply accepting what Diane and Amber had done. James still seemed uncertain. What if they try to damage this dress too? Or cause some other problem at the wedding? That's why we keep it secret, Eliza emphasized. Only your most trusted circle will know. Your mother, Kate, your maid of honor. But no one else? And we make them believe I've completely given up on the original, I added, the plan solidifying in my mind. I need to seem defeated, resigned. But not angry, Eliza cautioned. Angry people are unpredictable. They'll be suspicious if you seem too angry. You need to appear as if you've processed your grief and moved on, chosen the path of least resistance. James finally nodded, a reluctant smile forming. It's actually quite brilliant, and it gives us back some control. Exactly, I agreed, squeezing his hand. This isn't just about getting even. It's about reclaiming our wedding day. As we left the boutique with 2 garment bags, the decoy dress openly visible, the phoenix dress hidden under James's coat, I felt like a weight had been lifted. For the first time since the theft, I was looking forward to our wedding again. Are you sure about this? James asked as we drove home. It seems so different from your usual straightforward approach. I thought about it for a moment. Sometimes being straightforward doesn't work with people who refuse to play by the rules. Your mother and sister crossed a line, James. They tried to take something precious from me, something that can't be replaced. This plan isn't about stooping to their level. It's about being smart in how we respond. He nodded slowly. I guess I'm still processing that my own mother would do something like this. I know, I said softly. And I'm sorry you're caught in the middle. I'm not in the middle, he corrected firmly. I'm by your side. Always. And for the first time in days, I fully believed him. Putting our plan into action required something I wasn't sure I had in me. Acting skills. I needed to convince Diane and Amber that I'd given up, that I was no longer fighting for my original dress. It meant swallowing my pride, my anger, and my sense of justice, at least on the surface. Remember, James coached me as we drove to his parents' house the following weekend. You're sad but accepting. You've moved on. I know, I said, taking a deep breath. I can do this. We'd called ahead, letting Robert know we wanted to clear the air before the wedding. He sounded relieved, like he thought this was a genuine peace mission. In a way, it was, just not the kind he was expecting. Diane greeted us at the door, her smile cautious but triumphant. She was dressed impeccably as always, not a hair out of place. James, Catherine, I'm so glad you've come. We have so much to discuss with only 2 weeks until the wedding. Amber was conspicuously absent at first, no doubt waiting to make an entrance. Before we get into wedding details, I said, keeping my voice deliberately soft and resigned, I wanted to talk about the dress situation. Diane's expression flickered briefly, wariness, then calculation. Yes, of course. An unfortunate misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, James said firmly. We'd agreed he wouldn't fake forgiveness. His anger would make my surrender seem more genuine. You stole Kate's dress and you damaged it beyond repair. Diane had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, though not truly remorseful. We've apologized for that, and offered to pay for a replacement. That's actually why we're here, I said, clasping my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking. The dress, it can't be fixed properly, not in time for the wedding. so I've chosen a different one. The flash of victory in Diane's eyes was unmistakable, though she quickly masked it with a sympathetic frown. Oh, Catherine, I'm so sorry to hear that. But perhaps it's for the best. I'm sure whatever you've chosen will be lovely. As if on cue, Amber swept into the room, wearing a designer outfit that probably cost more than our entire wedding budget. I thought I heard voices, she said, feigning surprise at seeing us. What a nice surprise. Kate was just telling us she's chosen a new dress, Diane informed her daughter, a subtle note of triumph in her voice. Amber's eyes lit up. Really? What's it like? I'd prepared for this. I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo of the decoy dress, simple, elegant, but nowhere near as special as my original gown. It's very simple, Amber said, not bothering to hide her satisfaction. Probably more appropriate for your figure anyway. I bit my tongue and nodded, looking down as if her words had struck a nerve. It was the best option on short notice. What happened to the original dress? Amber asked, a touch too innocently. I thought you were having it repaired. Too damaged, James answered for me, his voice tight. The alterations were too extensive to reverse properly. Diane placed a comforting hand on my arm, the first time she'd ever touched me with anything resembling warmth. Sometimes things work out for the best, dear. I'm sure you'll look lovely in your new dress. And what about my original dress? I asked, watching their faces carefully. The one you took? A silent glance passed between mother and daughter. Diane answered smoothly. It's been properly stored away. Since you no longer need it, perhaps we could discuss Amber using it for her wedding. She and Bradley are getting quite serious, you know. Bradley? I asked. I thought you said he was proposing next month. Has that changed? A flicker of annoyance crossed Diane's face. Well, these things are fluid, but it's only a matter of time. I see, I said, forcing a smile. Well, about my original dress. I've been thinking a lot about this situation, about what family means. Diane's expression grew cautiously hopeful. Yes? You're right that family should support each other, I continued, the rehearsed words feeling bitter on my tongue. And since the dress can't be restored for my wedding anyway, I don't see why Amber shouldn't have it. The look of shock on both their faces was almost worth the pain of saying those words. Clearly, they'd expected more of a fight. Really? Amber asked, suspicion evident in her voice. You'd just give it to me? I nodded, trying to look appropriately sad but resigned. What good would it do me to hold on to a damaged dress? If you can use it for your wedding someday, at least it won't go to waste. Diane recovered quickly, her surprise morphing into smug satisfaction. How very mature of you, Catherine. I knew you'd come around eventually. Family is about compromise after all. Yes, I agreed, squeezing James's hand for support. It is. May I see it? I asked, as if the request was casual. One last time? For closure? Again, that glance between mother and daughter. Then Amber nodded. Sure, it's upstairs. I can show you the alterations we're planning. We followed her to her room, where the dress hung in her closet. The sight of it still made my heart ache. The careful beadwork, the delicate fabric, the vintage feel that had reminded me so much of my grandmother. Amber had already started sketching designs for additional alterations, lowering the back further, adding more crystals to the bodice, changing the silhouette completely. It'll be perfect once we finish, she said, watching my face for any sign of regret or anger. Much more glamorous. I ran my fingers over the fabric one last time, allowing genuine sadness to show on my face. It was a beautiful dress. It will be an even more beautiful dress, Diane corrected, putting an arm around her daughter. On Amber. I'm sure it will, I said quietly. I wish you both happiness with it. The rest of the visit passed in a blur of tense small talk. Diane, emboldened by her apparent victory, began making suggestions for our wedding. Changes to the menu, the flowers, the music. James shut her down firmly each time, maintaining his role as the protective, angry fiancé. As we prepared to leave, Diane pulled me aside in the foyer. I'm glad we could resolve this amicably, Catherine. I knew you'd be reasonable eventually. Life's too short for grudges, I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, especially over material things. Exactly, she agreed, patting my arm. And your new dress is appropriate. Sometimes simpler is better. On the drive home, I finally let the mask drop, tears of anger and hurt flowing freely. That was harder than I thought it would be. The way they looked at me, like I was pathetic for giving in. James reached over to squeeze my hand. You were incredible. They completely bought it. Even I almost believed you meant it. Did you see the way they were already planning more alterations? They're going to change it so much it won't even be the same dress anymore. That's their loss, James said firmly. Meanwhile, your real dress, your Phoenix dress, is going to be even more spectacular. He was right. The next day, I had a fitting for the secret dress, and Eliza had news that made my heart soar. We managed to salvage 12 of the original pearl buttons, she announced proudly, showing me the delicate treasures she'd carefully removed from the damaged dress while Amber wasn't looking. Not all of them, but enough to line the cuffs and highlight the bodice. Your grandmother will still be with you on your wedding day. As our wedding drew closer, maintaining the deception became easier. I showed my bridesmaids the decoy dress, making them promise not to tell anyone how different it was from my original vision. I even posted a vague update on social media about embracing change and finding beauty in simplicity, knowing Diane and Amber would interpret it exactly as we wanted. Only my mother, Rachel, and James knew about the Phoenix dress, which was coming together more beautifully than I could have imagined. Each fitting was done in secret, with the dress never leaving Eliza's secure workroom. 1 week before the wedding, Diane called to check in on final preparations. I'm so glad we worked everything out, Catherine, she said warmly. Amber is thrilled with the dress. She's planning to debut a small part of it at your reception. Just the veil. Nothing that would take attention away from you, of course. I gripped the phone tightly but kept my voice pleasant. How thoughtful of her. And how is your simple dress coming along? No regrets? None at all, I lied smoothly. Sometimes simple is exactly what you need. As I hung up, I couldn't help smiling. In just 7 days, Diane and Amber would learn exactly what happens when you underestimate a bride who refuses to be bullied, even by family. My wedding day dawned clear and perfect, one of those rare October days when summer and autumn seem to coexist in perfect harmony. The garden venue was ablaze with golden light filtering through red and orange leaves, and the morning air had just enough crispness to feel magical. I woke up early in my hotel suite, surrounded by my bridesmaids and my mom. Today was the day, not just to marry James, but to reclaim what had been taken from me. Are you nervous? Rachel asked as she helped me with my makeup. About marrying James? Not at all, I replied. About pulling off our plan? Absolutely. My mom squeezed my shoulder. Everything's in place. Eliza delivered the dress at 5 this morning. It's hanging in the closet, and it's breathtaking. We had implemented elaborate security measures for the Phoenix dress. It had been transported under guard, kept locked away, and only my most trusted people knew about it. We'd even created a decoy getting ready schedule, letting it slip to Diane that I wouldn't be putting on my dress until 30 minutes before the ceremony, when in reality, I'd be dressed an hour earlier. "Has anyone seen Diane or Amber yet?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Rachel nodded. "They arrived about 20 minutes ago. Amber's wearing this ridiculous outfit, technically appropriate for a wedding guest, but clearly designed to steal attention, and she's carrying a small garment bag." "The veil," I guessed. "She's actually going to wear part of my original dress at my wedding." "Not for long," my mom said with a gleam in her eye. "I can't wait to see their faces." As my bridesmaids helped me into the phoenix dress, I felt a sense of rightness wash over me. Eliza had outdone herself. The dress wasn't just a replacement for what was lost. It was a masterpiece in its own right. The bodice hugged my curves perfectly, with intricate beadwork forming a pattern more beautiful than the original. The skirt flowed like liquid silk, creating a silhouette that was both classic and uniquely me. And there, gracing the cuffs and scattered across the bodice, were my grandmother's pearl buttons, rescued from the original dress, restored, and lovingly integrated into this new creation. I touched one gently, feeling the connection to my past, my heritage, my future. "It's better than the original," Rachel whispered. "It really is." "No pictures," I reminded everyone. "Not until after the ceremony." The plan was simple. I would remain hidden until the last possible moment. Diane and Amber would believe I was wearing the simple decoy dress until I actually appeared at the end of the aisle. By then, it would be too late for them to react without causing a scene. From my hiding spot near the ceremony site, I could see guests arriving. James's father led Diane to their seats in the front row. She was impeccably dressed as always, her expression a careful mask of polite happiness that didn't reach her eyes. Beside her walked Amber, wearing a form-fitting blush gown that bordered on inappropriate for a morning wedding. Her hair elaborately styled, and draped over her arm was a delicate lace veil. My veil from my original dress. Even from a distance, I recognized the distinctive edge pattern that had been designed to complement my grandmother's buttons. "She's actually doing it," Rachel hissed beside me. "She's carrying the veil like it's a casual accessory." "Perfect," I whispered back. "That makes what's coming even better." As the music began and the ceremony started, my bridesmaids lined up for their procession. My mom gave me one last hug. "You look absolutely radiant," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm so proud of how you've handled all of this." "I learned from the best," I replied, hugging her back. "Now go take your seat and enjoy the show." I watched through the garden foliage as the bridal party made their way down the aisle. Then my mom was escorted to her seat in the front row, directly across from Diane and Amber. James took his place under the flower-covered arch, handsome in his tailored suit, his eyes scanning the back of the garden, waiting for me. Finally, the bridal march began. The guests rose, and I stepped out from my hiding place, the phoenix dress catching the morning light in a way that made the beadwork shimmer like stars. The collective gasp was audible, exactly what every bride hopes for. But amid the sounds of appreciation and awe, I heard one sharp intake of breath that was distinctly different. Shock, not admiration. I kept my eyes fixed on James as I walked down the aisle, his face illuminated with love and pride. But in my peripheral vision, I could see Diane and Amber. Diane's perfectly composed facade had cracked, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with disbelief. Beside her, Amber had gone pale, her knuckles white as she clutched the stolen veil. As I passed their row, I turned my head slightly and made direct eye contact with them both, allowing a small, victorious smile to curve my lips for just a second before returning my attention to James. The ceremony itself was perfect. Meaningful vows, the right amount of tears and laughter, the warm support of family and friends surrounding us. As James slipped the ring on my finger and we were pronounced husband and wife, I felt a wave of pure joy that had nothing to do with dress revenge and everything to do with beginning our life together. It wasn't until the reception that Diane finally approached me, her composure regained, but strain evident around her eyes. "That's not the dress you showed us," she said, her voice tight. "No," I agreed pleasantly. "It's not." "But you said—" "I said I had chosen a different dress because my original one was too damaged," I corrected her. "And I did. This is that different dress." She stared at the intricate beadwork, the flowing silhouette, the pearl buttons. "But how?" "Those are the same buttons that were on my original dress?" "Yes, some of them are. Eliza was able to salvage them before you and Amber could destroy them all." Her face flushed. "You deliberately misled us." "Yes," I said simply. "I did. Just as you deliberately stole my wedding dress." "It was a misunderstanding." "No, Diane, it wasn't. But today isn't about that. Today is about James and me starting our life together. I hope you can be happy for us." Before she could respond, James appeared at my side, his hand protectively at the small of my back. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his eyes on his mother. "Perfect," I said truthfully. "Your mother was just admiring my dress." Diane's lips thinned, but she managed a stiff nod. "It's unique." "Thank you," I replied. "Oh, and Amber might want to put that veil away now. It doesn't match her dress at all." As we moved away to greet other guests, I caught sight of Amber across the room. She was no longer wearing or carrying the veil, and she was staring at me with a mixture of anger and, was it possible, a hint of respect. Throughout the reception, I noticed people comparing the two of us, the bride in her stunning, one-of-a-kind gown, and the sister-in-law who had clearly tried and failed to outshine her. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or more satisfying. Later, as James and I shared our first dance, he pulled me close and whispered, "Have I told you how absolutely incredible you look in that dress?" "Once or twice," I laughed, "but you can keep saying it." "Not just the dress," he clarified. "The way you handled everything. You didn't let them win, but you also didn't stoop to their level. You found a creative solution instead of just fighting back." I rested my head against his shoulder, watching the dance floor over his shoulder. Diane and Robert were dancing stiffly across the room. Amber was nowhere to be seen. "I learned something important through all this," I told him. "Some people will try to take what's yours. Your joy, your special moments, your peace of mind. You can fight them directly and risk becoming bitter, or you can outsmart them and keep your integrity intact." "Is that what you did? Outsmart them?" I smiled, feeling the weight of my beautiful dress, the reassuring presence of my grandmother's pearl buttons against my skin. Let's just say I refused to let them steal my happiness. Today, or any day. And as we twirled across the dance floor, surrounded by people who truly loved us, I knew that was the real victory. The day after our wedding, James and I slept in late, exhausted from the celebration, but blissfully happy. As we enjoyed room service breakfast in our hotel suite, we scrolled through the photos our friends had already shared online. In every shot, my phoenix dress gleamed like a symbol of resilience. "Have you checked your phone this morning?" James asked, buttering a piece of toast. "Any messages from my mother?" I shook my head. "Nothing. I'm guessing she needs time to process her defeat." "I still can't believe they actually thought they'd get away with it," he said, shaking his head. "Or that Amber actually brought the veil to wear at our wedding. The audacity is almost impressive." "Almost," I agreed. but I think yesterday taught them something important. That I won't be pushed around. That there are consequences for crossing certain lines. Do you think they learned that lesson, though? James looked skeptical. My mother doesn't exactly have a history of personal growth and self-reflection. It was a fair point. Diane had spent a lifetime prioritizing appearances and getting her way. One wedding day defeat wasn't likely to transform her character overnight. Maybe not, I admitted, but they've learned that I'm not an easy target, and that you'll stand with me, not them. That's a start. We enjoyed 3 blissful days at a lakeside cabin for our mini honeymoon. A longer trip to Europe was planned for spring, before returning to real life. I went back to my nursing shifts, James to his university position, and we began the process of merging our lives completely as husband and wife. For nearly 2 weeks, we heard nothing from Diane or Amber. Robert called once to awkwardly congratulate us again and mentioned that the ladies are taking some time to adjust. Then, exactly 16 days after our wedding, my phone rang with Diane's number. "Catherine," she began, her voice carefully neutral. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all," I replied, equally measured. "What can I do for you, Diane?" There was a pause, like she was gathering courage. "I was hoping we might meet for coffee. Just the two of us. There are some things I'd like to discuss." My first instinct was to refuse. What could she possibly have to say that I wanted to hear? But something in her tone, a slight uncertainty that I'd never heard before, made me reconsider. "All right," I agreed cautiously. "When and where?" We met the next day at a small cafe halfway between our homes. Diane was already seated when I arrived, looking immaculate as always, but somewhat subdued. No designer handbag displayed prominently on the table, no flashy jewelry. Just a simple gray pantsuit and minimal makeup. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "I was curious," I admitted. "It's not like you to request a one-on-one meeting." She smiled tightly. "No, I suppose it isn't." She took a sip of her tea before continuing. "I wanted to speak with you about what happened. With your dress." I waited, not making it easier for her. What Amber and I did was wrong," she said finally, the words seeming to cost her considerable effort. "It was selfish and thoughtless and cruel." To say I was shocked would be an understatement. In all the time I'd known Diane Chen, I had never once heard her admit to being wrong about anything. "Yes, it was," I agreed simply. "I've spent the past 2 weeks thinking about my behavior, and I don't like what I see," she continued. "The truth is, I've always prided myself on getting what I want, on making things perfect for my family, especially for Amber. But somewhere along the way, I started believing that our wants and needs mattered more than anyone else's." I studied her face, looking for signs of insincerity, but all I saw was genuine discomfort and what appeared to be real remorse. "What changed?" I asked. "Why the sudden self-awareness?" Diane sighed. "Several things. Robert has been unusually firm with me. He said my behavior at your wedding was the last straw, that he wouldn't stand by while I damaged our relationship with our son. That explained the subdued appearance, trouble at home. And then last week, Amber came home in tears. Apparently, Bradley found out about what we did with your dress. Someone at the wedding told him. He said he couldn't be with someone who would steal a wedding dress from her own brother's fiancé." She looked down at her hands. "He broke off their relationship." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. Not because I felt Amber deserved Bradley, but because I wouldn't wish heartbreak on anyone, even her. "The thing is," Diane continued, "for the first time, Amber is facing consequences for her behavior. for our behavior, and watching her hurt has made me see how my protection has actually harmed her in the long run. I nodded slowly. It's hard to learn that you can't always get what you want, especially when you're used to having things handed to you. Yes, she took a deep breath. I don't expect you to forgive me, Catherine. What I did was unforgivable. But I wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. And I'm truly sorry. The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the polished, manipulative Diane I knew. This was a woman humbled by her mistakes, genuinely trying to make amends. I appreciate that, I said carefully. And I want you to know something. I don't hate you, Diane. I was hurt and angry, yes. But I've never wanted a permanently broken family. James loves you, despite everything. You're still his mother. Relief washed over her face. Does that mean... Is there a chance we could start over? Perhaps not as close friends, but at least as civil family members? I considered her question. Was I ready to let go of the anger? To give her another chance? The wedding dress incident had been hurtful, yes, but holding on to that pain wouldn't make my life with James any better. I think that's possible, I said finally. But it will take time. And consistent effort. From both of us. I understand, she nodded. And Amber? Do you think you could ever? That's a harder one, I admitted. But I'm willing to be open to the possibility that she, too, can change. As we finished our coffee, Diane asked about my dress, where it was now, what I planned to do with it. I told her about my decision to donate it to a charity that provided wedding dresses to brides who couldn't afford them. That's very generous of you, she said, seeming genuinely impressed. Some things are too special to be locked away, I explained. My grandmother's buttons taught me that. They sat in storage for decades before finding new life in my dress. I want my dress to bring someone else joy now. As we parted ways outside the cafe, Diane surprised me by reaching out for a tentative hug. Thank you, she whispered, for giving our family another chance. Family is worth fighting for, I replied, even when it's complicated. Driving home, I felt a lightness I hadn't expected. Forgiveness, I was discovering, freed not just the forgiven, but also the forgiver. When James came home that evening, I told him about the meeting with his mother. You think she's really changed? He asked, skeptical but hopeful. I think she's trying, I answered honestly. And that's a start. We'll take it one day at a time. Later that week, I delivered my beautiful Phoenix dress to Brides for Hope, a charity that helped women who had overcome difficult circumstances afford their dream weddings. As I handed it over, the coordinator gasped. "This is exquisite," she breathed. "Someone is going to feel like an absolute princess in this." That's the point, I smiled. Some things are too special not to be shared. As I walked back to my car, I thought about everything that had happened. My perfect dress had been stolen, damaged, and ultimately transformed into something even more meaningful. In a strange way, Diane and Amber's actions had led me to this moment, to passing on something beautiful to someone who needed it more than I did now. Sometimes the things you fight hardest to keep are the very things you should let go. And sometimes, the most precious things can't be stolen at all. Respect, trust, and the unshakable knowledge that you stood up for what was right.